Today, I thought we would talk about writing backstory into your novel or short story, really, or memoir. It works with all kinds of narrative, but backstory. So, I had a question the other day on one of my Ask Alida calls about front loading information. This novelist felt like she was opening her story too deep in the action because she felt it necessary to write lots of information at the beginning of her story. Very common problem. And this is really a question about backstory, right? So, to get into this, let's define our terms. What is backstory? Well, it's the stuff that happened in your protagonist's life that is relevant to the now story and necessary for the reader to know. So the reader has to get this piece of information in order to understand and enjoy what is happening in your story. Okay. History is something else. History is all of the stuff in your character's background that never needs to make it to the page. So that's the work we do as writers when we're developing our characters and we want to understand what their childhood was like, what sort of personality they have, school age experiences, political and religious leanings in the family or community. All of those things may never make it to the page. In fact, if we can call them history, then they don't, by definition, ever make it to the page. But we need to know it because it shapes our character's psyche. So it shapes the motivation and the choices that our protagonist makes. Once one of those little developmental tidbits makes it onto the page, it graduates. It's no longer history, it's now backstory. And then we've got now story, whatever is happening in the present moment in your story, in that scene, on that page. So it doesn't matter what you're doing with chronology as you weave your narrative together. It doesn't matter where in time it is in relation to, a different chapter or a different scene. What matters is that it's information, typically an event, right, that occurred outside the frame of your story. If it occurred within that frame, it would just be in a different chapter. So, how do we know when to place our backstory into our now story so that we do not front load a bunch of information at the opening of the book? Well, there's a rule. It's very simple, right? Easy rules, sometimes challenging execution, and that's the way it is with writing and storycraft, which is kind of awesome, actually. So the rule is we place backstory in the now story when it is relevant to the now story. So put it in, right? Write it on the page on a need to know basis. Does my reader need to know this bit of information right now in order to understand and enjoy my story? If the answer is no, then question whether or not you really need that piece of backstory at all, whether it could go somewhere else better, right? If it could better fit in a different part of your story. Or, think about if you say, yes, I need to use it, does it need to be here? Maybe not, but this is the best moment to share it. And I really want it in here because of a deeper understanding of our character's psychology or whatever. That's a great reason for relevance, right? So when I say understand and enjoy, that's speaking broadly. I don't mean that the sequence of events will be unclear if we don't have this bit of backstory. So just to clarify there, it's a broad sense of the word. Okay. Before we go too far down that path, how do you put backstory into your now story? Well, we've got three methods for doing that. The first is narrative exposition, second is dialogue, third is flashback. A lot of writers jump to flashback. They go there first because it seems obvious, because they're used to writing in scene. They're in that scenic mode of processing their story and telling it, getting it on the page. But you want to always look at all three choices and make a conscious decision based on what's best for your story. So, what are the criteria for making that decision? Let's look at narrative exposition. Narrative exposition means it's coming from your authorial voice. Or if you've got a first person narrator, that first person voice, it's coming to the reader through the narrative. And this is a great choice when you do not want to slow down the pace of your scene. You want to drop in some information, keep it quick, almost like an aside, right? Like if you walk into a party with your best friend and the action is that you're entering a crowd and you're sort of scoping out the room and you're going to see who you talk to first and where the drinks table is. That's all the action. That's what's happening in the now. But you realize there's that guy across the room and you really want your best friend to know this little thing about that guy, right? You're going to lean over and whisper it, have that aside with your best friend. That's that backstory. So the narrator has the opportunity to drop stuff in seamlessly within other moments of description. And I do not mean she remembered when she had a really terrible date with that guy or whatever the bit of backstory is in this scenario. I mean, using your narrative voice. So when you don't have a lot to expose or reveal with that bit of backstory, narrative exposition can be a great choice. It's simple, it's easy, drop it in. When you've got a scene that's moving, right? It's got a good clip to it, and you don't want to slow down that pace. You could drop in backstory in a sentence or two. You could also take multiple paragraphs to do it in narrative exposition. Your hands are never tied. You get to choose, but do what's appropriate and best for your story. Okay, so dialogue. Dialogue is great when you've got a scene with dialogue, right? So you're already using dialogue in that scene. You want to inform the reader about something in the past, but you don't want to use narrative exposition because you want to keep that exchange moving. You don't want to interrupt the exchange. And you can use dialogue to its best effect. So let's say we've got two people having a conversation and they're both in the know, right? They both had an experience of whatever this piece of backstory is. Then they aren't going to spell it out for each other. They're just going to allude to it. They'll make references. They'll carry on based on that shared knowledge. So as the writer crafting this bit of dialogue, you get to use subtext, and that can be really exciting. It creates a kind of repartee between the characters, and the reader is doing the work, right, of figuring out what that reference point is, what it means, what the emotional energy is behind it, how it's relevant between these two characters in the moment, but also in the context of the larger scene. So dialogue can do more than reveal backstory in the now story by both revealing that backstory and functioning as part of the now story through that exchange between characters. Okay. If you use dialogue, do not do it for the sake of the reader. Okay. You need to make certain that these characters are speaking to each other and you, as the author, are not intruding into their conversation in order to address the reader, to inform the reader of something. If you do that, you've just made that exchange unnatural. Get it out of there. Use a different method. Okay. Now, our third option is flashback. Flashback is the most robust option. It takes more ink because we are going back in time to reveal the backstory in an actual scene. So we go from one scene to another scene. We're taking not only our character into the past, but also our reader is being plucked from the now story into the backstory. So, when do you want to use backstory? If the thing you are revealing is powerful and dynamic in its own right. If it's going to keep the momentum going through your story, maintaining, or better yet, increasing stakes and tension through whatever this reveal is, then go back in time. Give it to us in scene. What you don't want to do is have your character driving a car, sitting at a desk, or laying in bed as your now moment in the story, and then go backwards in their thoughts to remember something. That's not the purpose of a flashback, and it's hokey. You know, you see it on like SNL and TV spoofs when you've got a character sitting there looking very thoughtful, and then the screen goes to like a diamond pattern or wavy lines, right? It's a joke. So never do that in your writing because culturally we're past it. So make certain that you are using flashback judiciously at a time when it is best and most appropriate. I mean, how many times can I say that? But that's really what it comes down to because there isn't a ruler you can hold up to your story and say, at this mark, I use flashback. At this one, I use dialogue. You've got to feel into your scene, know what's happening, know your characters, know what that backstory is all about, and then make a choice. So it's your judgment call as the author. So I hope that was helpful. If you've got questions, definitely throw them into the comments for me. We talked about definitions, what backstory is, now story, and history. We also talked about the 3 ways to get backstory into your now story, and a little bit about how to make the best decision for your scene, for what you're writing. And if you want to go deep into backstory, I've got a winter workshop coming up. I think it's in January, called Writing Backstory into Your Now Stories. We'll have examples and exercises and discussion. If you want to check that out, go to wordessential.com/workshops. I'll put a link below. I'm Alida Winternheimer, your developmental editor and storycraft coach at Word Essential.